What cold case or unsolved crime still gives you chills? The disappearance of Timothy Pidson. He was a 6-year-old who was dropped off at school by his father and then later picked up by his mother, who took him on a 3-day vacation seeing various amusement parks. Her body was later found in a motel room, dead from a suicide by Timothy was never found. Her suicide note claimed Timothy was safe, but would never be found, and since 2011 no trace of him has ever been discovered, dead or alive. The idea that she took him to all these wonderful places in a bid to show him an amazing time in what very well was the last days of his life fills me with so much sorrow and sends chills down my spine. It's just a case I think about often. The 3 men who made a master plan to escape Alcatraz Island. It was thought out so well and no one expected it. They started their way out after lights were out and everyone was in a cell and the guards weren't on duty. It was nighttime in June, so the waters always cool down. Many think they escaped on a raft and made it somewhere safe. Others are unsure and think they might have drowned or froze in the water. To think if they succeeded or not makes my chest quiver. The way I see it, those 3 are the reason the prison closed down. A case that made me extremely scared is Belle Gunness. She was killer in 1900. She killed so many people that her backyard was filled with buried body parts of almost 27 different humans. She wrote to people to come meet her and they never went back. But the thing that gave me chills last night when I was listening to the story was that her house was set on fire with 2 kids inside and a headless body of a woman. Neighbors said that the body looked smaller than Belle's and the head was never found. She had wanted people to believe that she had burned in the fire with the kids, but I'm pretty sure she escaped and was never found again. She seemed like a very scary and a vile woman. Scared the scrap out of me. Couldn't sleep last night thinking how many lives she could have taken after her fake death. Terrence Woods was filming a documentary in the Idaho backcountry in 2018. He had recently expressed he felt unfulfilled and missed his family. He was due to fly back the very next day. During a break-in shooting at a mine, he wandered off in full view of everyone else and took off running into the woods never to be seen or heard from again. My theory is he fell into an unmarked and unknown mine shaft that are extremely common in 19th century mines. I nearly fell in one myself in a similar area in Idaho, but why would he take off running in the first place? There are theories that he ran away and was picked up by someone else at a predetermined spot in the road, but he was not known as an outdoorsman, and to call this area rural and rugged is a vast understatement. I worked with the BLM in this exact area and the closest thing I can compare it to in its isolation is Alaska. The coldest case that I know of was committed in 1888. A man going by the name Jack the Ripper chopped up his victims and left them in London's dark alleyways without a trace to follow. Unfortunately, no one has ever found a reliable lead on this killer, and it remains unsolved today. This case is so fascinating because it was able to attract the attention of the entire world for over a year. Every waking moment people would try to find clues, and everyone was trying to solve this crime that had yet been committed. This is interesting because even though there were no real witnesses in the cases, everyone was still using their own mind to solve this problem. It was also interesting because it showed that many people would rather believe something without any real evidence than to find out the true answer. This shows how humans really need a sort of mental security in their life. The amount of cases that occur every day is truly staggering, and it is simply hard to find any time to pay attention. This really shows the extent people will go for something as simple as a story. Oklahoma Girl Scout murders in 1977. There was an annual Girl Scout camp in Enny, Oklahoma. During a camp counselor training, the place got ransacked and someone left a note about murdering 3 campers. The note was believed to be a joke. Months later, the girls arrive at the camp. There's a thunderstorm at night. Overnight, the campers say they heard guttural noises coming from the woods and a girl crying out for her mother. The campers and counselors thought it was a homesick girl. In the morning, a counselor found 3 girls, who were from the same tent, along a camp trail. They had been raped and murdered. There was an arrest, but he was acquitted. He died shortly after trial. He was sent to jail for a previous charge. Some still believe he did it, but DNA evidence was inconclusive. There's a bunch more twists and turns. You really have to read about it or listen to a podcast about it. The death of Erin Valenti. She was a CEO at a tech company that was studying brain-machine interface technology, or simply mind control, at the time. While on her way to a business conference in another state, she called her mother and her boyfriend. Her last words to the both of them were, "It's all a game. It's a thought experiment. We are in the Matrix." Police found her in her car a day or two later dead in the backseat. No sign of a struggle, just a healthy 33-year-old who died of suspected natural causes. There's a great video on YouTube by Blamit and George who explains it better than I ever could. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. He killed entire family and vanished. He has been looked for over a decade, and even today French media brings new info about his troubled past, money and marriage problems. That gives you chills. Elizabeth Bereza and her husband lived in the neighborhood behind me. On January 25, 2019, someone drove up to the house as she was setting up for a garage sale. The person got out of their truck and walked up and shot her several times and then drove away. We have surveillance video from a neighbor and it shows the whole thing, but there still hasn't been a suspect named. The Harris County police are at a loss. It was so early in the morning that the light was still low, so it's hard to tell if the person is even a male or female. Elizabeth was a wonderful person. She was heavily involved in a volunteer group that would visit hospitals dressed as characters from Star Wars. Her marriage was great. There's just no reason for someone to want to kill her. So over a year later there's been nothing. All we know right now is that a random person just drove up and shot Elizabeth in her driveway. The disappearance of Louis Le Prince. Most people refer to Thomas Edison as the father of motion pictures simply because he patented the idea. Louis Le Prince invented a motion picture camera before Edison could, but one day he boarded a train and that's when he was last seen. His wife couldn't submit the patent for the camera as she needed to wait a year, maybe 4 I think, to submit a missing person's patent. That's the same time as Edison invented his own motion picture camera / device, whatever they referred to it as, back in the early 1900s. If I recall correctly, the famous patent wars ensued, and Thomas Edison was regarded sole inventor of motion pictures. The Isdal woman. She was a foreign woman found burned to death at a remote area in Norway in 1970. She visited Norway twice in 1970, once in March 1970, and then in November 1970. The Isdal woman stayed at various hotels around Norway under several false names, and supposedly possessed false passports. Hotel staff reported that she kept to herself and spoke to them in German and broken English. She was also witnessed conversing in French with a man at a hotel lobby. The Isdal woman stood out in Norway because she looked foreign and dressed very stylishly. She was also a lone woman staying in hotels, which was unusual in 1970. After her death, it was rumored that she was a spy from Israel or Russia. Nobody knows who she is and why she came to Norway. Her death was ruled as a suicide, though many investigators dispute this ruling. Branson Perry disappeared from his own backyard in 2001. He had friends over to help get the house in order for his dad, who was coming home from the hospital. He went to the backyard to put something away in the shed, and no one saw him again. His dad came home like a week later than expected, so his disappearance wasn't reported till later. But what about the friends that were there with him? Did they not notice his disappearance? Why didn't they look for him? Then when police checked the shed, the item he was returning wasn't there, but shows up randomly like 2 weeks later. Apparently he had a history of drug use, and his dad had just caught him sleeping with a male friend a week before he disappeared or something. Somehow police came to the conclusion that he hitchhiked somewhere. They arrested a guy who would pick up young male hitchhikers and kill them, and he admitted to many murders but not Brandon. It's not eerie or chilling per se. There's just so many random facts about the case that don't seem to have any correlation. What's even stranger is that his cousin was actually murdered a few years after him. Some woman murdered her and removed her unborn baby from her stomach. That poor family. What are the odds? The USS Cyclops disappearance. A US Navy ship vanished without a trace with over 300 men on board in the Bermuda Triangle in 1918. What's even creepier is that 2 of her sister ships also vanished on that same route in the 1940s. Her other sister ship was renamed the USS Langley and converted into America's first aircraft carrier. The loss of the Cyclops is the largest non-combat loss of life in Navy history. The Dutch girls that went lost in the jungle of Panama. I think one of the cell phones and camera were found with pictures of the dark. Apparently they tried to use the flash to light their way for a moment. Weird thing is that it was extremely unlikely that they would go away from the path. I don't know, maybe it just seems extremely sad to me. The JonBenét Ramsey case. She was a pageant princess that was killed on Christmas in her family home when she was just 6 years old. A lot of people thought her parents did it, so the police basically ignored any evidence that didn't point to her parents, causing them to botch the case. There's so many theorizes on what happened, such as family friends at the party that night staying the house after hours, and then sneaking up to her room once everyone had fallen asleep, which has been debunked now, or that her brother was violent towards her and killed her with a blow to the head and the mother tried to cover it up. However, while it seems logical, it doesn't explain the two strangers' DNA found on her. Then there's the odd thing about whoever killed her fed her pineapples, one of her favorite snacks, revealing that it was possible JonBenét knew her killer. Giulio Regeni was an Italian university student from Cambridge. He was doing some research in Egypt for the American University in Cairo and he wrote some articles with a pseudonym about the 2011 Egyptian revolution. His dead and mutilated body was found on the side of a road outside Cairo on 3rd February 2016. He had signs on his body that indicated he was brutally tortured, broken ribs and fingers, both legs, arms and 5 teeth. He was probably killed by the Egyptian secret services. We still don't know the truth about his death and the Egyptian government still hasn't do anything to help Italy solve the case. This made and makes me realize how dangerous are some countries in the world still today. Claudia Kirschhoch, a journalist going to a press trip in Havana, Cuba, didn't make it to her destination. The 29-year-old stayed at the Sandals Beaches Resort in Negril, Jamaica while waiting for available flights to the United States, since she was not able to enter Cuba. Kirschhoch stayed a bit longer at the resort before mysteriously disappearing. The only missing things from her room were the clothes she wore the night of her disappearance. Kirschhoch befriended bartender Anthony Grant, whose behavior, including calling in sick for 4 days after her disappearance, seems noteworthy. Further investigations found evidence of Kirschhoch in his car, but authorities don't consider him a suspect. A 2002 judge ruling says Kirschhoch died of foul play, but there were no charges.